Welcome to the True Master Games YouTube channel and welcome to another episode of A Game Master's Musings. In tonight's episode, we are talking about creativity, restrictions and limitations and how they work together and how those restrictions and limitations can actually help and improve your creative process. Role-playing games, the creation of worlds, of characters, of storylines, they're all about creativity, right? They are an extremely creative process. And rules and limitations are the enemy of such process. They stop limitless creativity. Thus, having such limitations in your games, in your game worlds, is a bad thing, right? Wrong. Having no limitations when it comes to the elements of your world, what magic can or cannot achieve, what player, character, races and classes might be available, what cultures there are, technological levels, items, and so on, having no limitations when it comes down to all these things is a bad thing for your game world. Actor and director Orson Welles once said, "The absence of limitation is the enemy of art." Frank Gehry, the famous architect, said that unlimited resources lead to sloppy design. Of course, if you do have unlimited resources, you can afford to make small or even large mistakes and everything will still be okay. Magic the Gathering's lead designer, Mark Rosewater, has the saying, "Restrictions breed creativity," as one of his main credos. In fact, looking at Magic the Gathering, at the world building that is done there, you can see very easily how restriction can enhance such a creative process. Magic and the worlds of Magic the Gathering, the planes, the cultures, the elements, the many different planets basically, can be very different from one another, but they share something. A lens, a focus through which you look at these worlds if you so want, and the designers look at these worlds. And that focus is the unifying element of the 5 colors of magic. Every culture, every game world, every plane is influenced by that, and that gives it a unifying element. A restriction, a limitation of course, but one that improves and makes the creative process more easy. It is extremely difficult to create something out of nothing. In fact, there is a story that I've heard about creative drawing classes. When pupils are faced with a blank canvas, a white sheet of paper, and they don't know where to start and how to start, teachers tell them to put a squiggly line somewhere on the paper. And then, once they have done that, they have a starting point. They have something, a limitation, because they have to put this line, use it somewhere in their drawing. But that limitation allows them to start. Constraints and limitations are problems to solve. They give us a starting point. How do we solve that problem in our world building, in our creation of stories? How do we turn the restrictions, those perceived weaknesses, into actions, into strengths? And how do all those solutions that we have found to the different problems and limitations fit together? Now that is where the creative process really sets in. The combination of those solutions is what is actually a very important focus of any creative process. For me, for certain. And I bet the same is true for many of you as well, even though you maybe never consciously thought about it so far. Limitations are a lens, a focus that draws our gaze and focuses it on specific parts of the creative process. Building blocks, if you so wish, that will, in the end, create your game world. Or your player character, if you're a player, of course. There is a technique, again, coming from the drawing on canvas, that is called reducing the space. And that technique can very effectively be used in world building and creation, any creative process really, but we're talking about RPGs here, so we're mainly talking about world building, of course. Now, how does that technique work? How does reducing the space work? Well, it is a compounding of limitations and the solutions to these limitations. So maybe you have restrictions when you're doing a drawing. Maybe you have a triangle, or you have to have a triangle in the upper left corner. Maybe you have to have a circle in the lower right corner. Maybe you have to have a squiggly line somewhere in the center. And maybe you have to connect all of them. Those are all limitations, but also problems that you can solve one by one by one. First you incorporate one part, then the next, and then you combine them. And after a while, the white parts of the canvas grow smaller and smaller and smaller as the solutions to these limitations are compounded and connected. They converge bit by bit by bit, and in the end, the white parts of the canvas are gone and you have a painting in front of you. And the same technique works very well for world building. For those of you who think that might be a bit too limiting, remember, in our world, there's hundreds, maybe thousands of different colors, but reduce them all down and we have 3 core colors, and all the other colors are combinations of those 3 colors. Using only those 3 colors might at first seem like an incredible limitation, but it is not really. There's 3 strengths we would like to talk about in this video when it comes to world building and limitations, and what limitations give you for your world building. First point is that they force you to avoid very obvious solutions. Maybe you're creating an NPC, and you know the NPC is some sort of hunter that lives in the forest. You could take the lazy solution and say, he lives in the forest because he's an elf. His people have always done that. Alright? That's a fairly obvious solution. Can be interesting, but by itself, it really isn't. Now, if you have a limitation in your world, and of course this is just a very simple example of having no elves in your fantasy world, then you have to think a little deeper. Why is this character living in a forest? Maybe he is shunned by society because of a crime he committed. Something like that. Of course, this is not an amazingly much better solution to the whole why is this character living in a forest question, but it is a little more unique, I suppose. This thing is very important when it comes to magic and what is possible with magic, especially if you would like to run some sort of investigative mystery scenarios, riddles and conundrums and secrets that your player characters have to unveil. Basically, how did someone do something, and who was it who did that thing? If there's magic involved and there's no limitations when it comes to magic in your world, your players will always think, it was someone with magic. So they'll never really be searching for the answer too hard. And it's in fact the same will be true for you. If you're coming up with a story, your first thought might just simply be, yeah, someone with magic did it, that's fine. But that is a lazy solution, the obvious solution, and a solution that will weaken the verisimilitude of your world, and therefore make it more difficult for you and your players to immerse themselves into the story, to search for answers and try to find the logic behind the secret. And speaking of logic, the second strength of having limitations in place when it comes to world building is that they help you to an extreme degree, unlike anything else really, to establish a strong inner world logic. And not only that, that strong inner world logic gives your world a strong identity, and it serves to make your world different, to make it unique, to make it different from all the other cookie-cutter fantasy settings out there that other people might have. Of course, you might be fine with a cookie-cutter setting. It's certainly less work in some ways, less mental labor in a way, but it's probably never going to be quite as creative, quite as unique, and as I said before, it will be more difficult for your players and yourself to immerse yourselves in this world because of the lack of limitations in place and the lack of identity that creates or is created from these limitations. Last but not least, the third point where limitations can help you is improvising effectively. How does that work? Well, if your brain, when you're improvising at the game table, has to go through 50 different options every time, because everything's possible in your world, you will find it more difficult to find consistently effective ideas when it comes to improvising. But if your brain already has the focus lens, like the 5 colors of magic in Magic the Gathering, for instance, the focus lens is already in place, well, put in place by limitations, that is, then maybe you only have 15 or 20 options, and knowing that all those other 30 options or however many are not even on the table, they're not even remotely possible in your world, will make it quicker and easier for you and more effective for you to improvise when it comes to situations, to characters, and to their reactions to whatever your player characters came up with in that very moment. Now that was our video about restrictions and creativity. I hope I could inspire you to do some thinking about these topics. And as always, if you enjoyed our content, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. There will be a link to subscribe appearing right up here or maybe up here. We will be running games, as always, in the future. We will be talking about more Game Masters Musings. And in fact, I have a few interesting projects getting ready for the new year, so to speak. Until we see each other again, True Mouse Games says thank you for watching and good night.